How do you build an atrocity? It's a chilling question, isn't it? In this explainer, we're going to dive into one of history's darkest moments to try and understand the architecture of evil and this lingering question of guilt.
And it really all boils down to this one haunting question, something historians have been wrestling with for decades. Was the Holocaust the calculated, evil master plan of just one man? Or was it something else, the runaway result of a society that had completely broken down?
So where do we even begin? Well, first, we've got to appreciate just how tough this is for historians. I mean, how do you even begin to explain the unthinkable? How do you pin down a single cause for something so horrific? After World War II ended, once the initial shock and the grief started to settle, this massive historical debate kicked off. People needed to know more than just what happened. The real question was, how? How on earth could something like this systematic, industrial-scale murder, have ever been possible? And that's where we get this huge debate among historians. It really splits into two totally different ways of looking at how things got so bad so fast.
Okay, so here's the breakdown of those two competing theories. On one side, you have the intentionalist view. These historians believe it was all part of a long-term plan. They see a pretty straight line from Hitler's hateful ideas right to the gates of the death camps. But then you've got the functionalist view. They argue the path was way more chaotic and twisted, that it actually grew out of all this infighting and competition within the Nazi bureaucracy itself.
The intentionalist argument is pretty straightforward. For them, it's all about Hitler. The whole Nazi project, everything from their political goals to the final horrifying genocide, it all came from him, from his will, his ideology. Take him out of the equation, and this specific horror just doesn't happen. But then, the functionalists flip that idea on its head. They say, look, yeah, Hitler provided the hate and gave the orders, but the machine of death itself, that was built and run by thousands of regular bureaucrats. Ambitious paper pushers in a huge, messy system, all competing with each other, trying to please the boss and climb the ladder. So here's a way to think about it. It's like asking, did society, with all its widespread anti-Semitism, just load the gun? Did it create this incredibly dangerous situation that was ready to explode? Or did it still need someone like Hitler, a specific hitman, to actually step up and pull the trigger? That's the core of the debate. Okay, so this whole debate wasn't just for history books. It crashed head-on into the real world in a very dramatic way, in a courtroom. After the war, at the Nuremberg trials, these big abstract questions about who's to blame had to be answered. And not with theories, but with legal verdicts. Now, everyone knows about the big trial, right? The one with the top Nazi leaders like Hermann Göring. But what a lot of people don't realize is that it didn't stop there, not by a long shot. Thanks to this really important law, Control Council Law Number 10, the Allies could keep the trials going in their own zones of occupied Germany. And get this, that one law led to 12 more major trials at Nuremberg. 12! This was huge. We're not just talking about the architects of the regime anymore. Now they were going after the enablers, the people who were part of the very fabric of the society that let this happen. And just look at who they put on trial. I mean, the sheer scope is staggering. We're talking doctors, judges, powerful corporate bosses, the whole shebang. They were systematically picking apart the entire German state to figure out how every piece of it, from the legal system to big business, became a tool for committing these unbelievable crimes. So these trials basically forced the judges to tackle that functionalist argument head on. A lot of the defendants claimed they weren't really guilty. They argued they were just tiny, powerless cogs in a giant, unstoppable machine. So was that true? You saw this a lot with the big industrialists. Take Friedrich Flick, for example. His defense was that he was basically forced into it. He used this incredible phrase, howling with the wolves, basically saying, hey, we had no choice. We had to play along to survive and keep our companies from being taken. And this really puts you in the judge's seat, doesn't it? You have to weigh that claim, I was forced to do it, against the absolute horror of what they did. Using slave labor from concentration camps in their factories. So here's the question. Is fearing for your business a good enough excuse for that? Well, the court's answer was a resounding no. This judgment from the case against the industrialist Krupp says it all. The judges were crystal clear. They completely rejected the idea that trying to save your business could ever justify these kinds of crimes. especially when you think about the victims who had absolutely no choice at all. So, at the end of the day, Nuremberg laid down the law, literally. The verdict was clear. Guilt is personal. You can't just say, I was following orders or everyone else was doing it. That wasn't a good enough defense. In the eyes of the law, individuals make choices, and they have to be held accountable for them.
Okay, so the courts made their decision. Case closed, right? Well, not exactly. Legally, yes. But that historical debate we talked about, it's still very much alive. And really understanding this tension between what one person intends and what a whole system does is more relevant today than ever.
Because when you dig into this history, it forces you to face some really uncomfortable truths. It shows us how normal people, doctors, lawyers, business owners, can get wrapped up in something truly evil. It makes you ask the hard questions about what you believe, about when to obey and when to resist, and what we all need to do to make sure society never, ever goes down that path again. And that brings us to the final and maybe the most important point. The goal here isn't just to understand the how and why of history like it's some kind of machine. The real challenge is to remember the people. As the historian Richard Butler said, our job is to turn the numbers back into human beings. Because if we can't do that, then we've lost something essential about our own humanity.